Hi Art Nerds! Today I'd like to show you how to draw a hyacinth. This is a more complicated flower because it's a flower made up of lots of much smaller flowers, but if you're patient and if you work closely from your reference as shown here, you should be able to draw it without a problem. So I will link the original source for this reference image down in the description below, as well as link the materials you guys are going to need for this tutorial. I'm sketching this hyacinth. I'm having such a hard time with that word, hyacinth, in a Canson XL watercolor sketchbook because I plan on watercoloring this later on. So for this flower, I start with the line of action, then I lightly sketch in a conical shape since hyacinths have come to like a conical point. I'm also sketching in a few of the leaves. Now I'm going to start breaking down this complex flower into smaller, simpler shapes, into something we can actually manage. So I'm sketching in these circular shapes. These are going to become the main flowers, and it's just sort of helping me place them within the complex flower. Everything has been sketched in really lightly so far. We're just using these as guidelines. We're going to pencil them in a little bit darker later on, and then we're going to ink them at the end. So now that I have my basic flowers kind of sketched in, I can start breaking these down. But I'm starting with the buds at the very tippy top of our hyacinth since they're fairly simple to draw. So if you look closely at our reference image, the hyacinth flowers are 5-petaled flowers that kind of come into a trumpet shape down at the bottom. So that's what we're going to be drawing today. And I apologize for my hand kind of covering up what's going on, but you guys should be able to see that in a minute. So you can see kind of an elongated 5-pointed star shape as our individual flowers. So for each of those circles, we're going to draw one version, or we're going to draw a variation of that shape. I'm trying to alter it each time because flowers are very organic forms, and it's really important to kind of capture that. If I just basically copy and paste the same shape over and over again right next to each other, it's going to look very synthetic and it's going to be very noticeable. So we want to kind of capture this imperfection, and we also want to try to capture how this form is moving in space. So you remember earlier when we drew that conical shape, that's serving as a guide to help me draw the flowers as they curve around the form. And much like me, my camera is having focus issues, so I do apologize for that, and I know it's probably pretty triggering for some of you who have motion sickness, so my apologies. So our base sketch for our hyacinth is completed. Next, we're going to ink. To ink, we're going to use a Sakura Pigma FB brush pen. These are waterproof and alcohol marker proof. I plan on following up this series with a how to paint series for all of the flowers that I've shown you guys how to draw. So it's important for me to work on watercolor paper with a watercolor brush pen. But both the paper that I'm using and this brush pen are very easy to find. You can find a link to them down in the description below. But you can also often find the sketchbook at Walmart or Michael's, or any art supply store would carry it. And several supply stores will carry the Sakura Pigma FB, although I order mine online as it's easier to find them there. So I'm starting by sketching the leaves first. This is unusual in all of our other flower tutorials. The leaves usually come last, but since they encircle the hyacinth flower and they overlap the flower, it was important that I draw them first. Next, I'm going to start inking the individual flowers, and I'm working really closely from our reference image. I'm using that as my guide, and it's up on the unseen computer screen. I also want to point out, while I got you guys, that this video has been time-lapsed by about 2. So it's okay if it takes you a lot longer than this, especially if you're just learning how to do this or you're kind of new to drawing. So you guys can see I'm trying to ink each flower individually, giving it enough detail and enough depth that it can stand out on its own. I did mention earlier I plan on watercoloring this later on, and I will scan these line arts and make them available to my patrons and over on Gumroad if you would prefer to just focus on painting this rather than coloring it. So for each individual flower, I'm also adding some striations to give it a little bit of form and a little bit of depth, curving them towards the center of the flower, following the line of the petal. And you guys will be able to see that a little bit better later on. So for a complex flower like a hyacinth, patience is really important. You have a couple of options with this. You can go for how the flower feels and mostly just sketch the outline and let your watercolor carry all of it. Or you can go in flower by flower, adding detail as you go and kind of using your judgment to decide when to add more. So we started with these base flowers, and I've been adding in just peaks of petals here and there just to help fill out the form. So you guys can see here, I basically just inked the flowers that we sketched in. These are in the forefront, they're closest to the viewer. Now I'm going to go in and start inking some of the other flowers that we've sketched. I'm also going in and sketching additional petals so I can judge how those look. If I do it in pencil, I don't have to ink them, I can use my discretion. If I go ahead and I ink them, sometimes I may ink something that I just can't take away. So for me, going in with pencil first is a good way to make decisions without commitment. So I've sketched in some extra petals. Now I'm going in and inking a few of those as well as inking a few more of the flowers. So we started with the flowers that are overlapping. Now we're going to start inking the flowers that are being overlapped. So we're working from front to back. The flowers at the top and at the sides are more in silhouette than the flowers that are actually facing us. This is where working really heavily from reference rather than just trying to remember how a hyacinth looks, this is where that's really going to come in handy, especially when you're just starting to learn flower shapes. We're also drawing and inking a few flowers along the bottom just for additional fullness. If you're interested in flowers beyond just drawing them, I highly recommend you check out Crime Pays But Botany Doesn't. It's a fantastic YouTube channel. The only caveat I have is there's some seriously strong language on that channel, so it's really more for adult audiences. But I really enjoy watching his flower walkarounds and his flower blogs, and it's been a really big inspiration for me. So if you're interested in flowers beyond drawing them, that's a great channel to check out. We are almost done inking our hyacinth. It's really not that difficult, but it is complex, so be patient with yourself and take your time. If you enjoy my art and you'd like to see more of it, you can check me out on Instagram at instagram.com/natosoup. And videos like this one are made possible with support thanks to my wonderful patrons on Patreon. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope